start the recording. Yes, so please mute yourself if you're not talking. That said, you are welcome to raise your hand and we will call on you, and you are welcome to unmute yourself and put your video on. You can also put questions in the chat for our speakers tonight. And so without further ado, let me introduce our speakers and the topic of tonight's webinar. So we are starting tonight with our webinar is called Accessible Archaeology at Barwick's Ordinary. And tonight we're going to be learning about digital technologies, research sharing, and public education at the site of the upcoming Archaeological Society of Maryland, the ASM Field Session. And the ASM Field Session will take place next month, and I'm sure that Julie will be given a plug for that here in just a few minutes. So we have 3 speakers that have been involved with Barwick's Ordinary. First, we have Dr. Julie Markin. She's an associate professor of anthropology at Washington College. Dr. Markin earned her bachelor's degree in anthropology and history from the University of Alabama and her doctoral degree in ecological anthropology from the University of Georgia. And Dr. Markin is a strong believer in collaboration and public education through her work with digital scholarship and museum partnerships. Her students have digitized over 4,000 images, recorded more than 15 hours of oral history, and developed virtual reality tours for 3 Kent County, Maryland museums. And so we're going to hear about a lot of her work with public education this evening. And then our second speaker is Jason Elder. He's a crew chief at Applied Archaeology and History Associates. And Jason's research in Maryland involves the use of drones to map and create 3D models of archaeological sites as a means of augmenting traditional field recording methods. And Jason was a 2019 graduate of Washington College. He got his BA in anthropology. And our third speaker is Emma Poole. She is a current anthropology major at Washington College. She received a grant from Washington College's Phi Beta Kappa chapter to develop digital resources for public archaeology outreach following last summer's 2021 excavations at Barwick's Ordinary. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. They're going to give their presentations. Like I said, feel free to put your questions in the chat whenever they're speaking. And after they finish their presentations, I hope we can have a conversation. So thank you again. And Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I will get this rolling here. Start presenting. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I coming on? All right. Okay. So I also want to add that for the field session this summer, that Jason is the co-director of the field session and the archaeology field school that Washington College is running, that we're running. And Emma is lab director / teaching assistant. And then there's also someone else online here who has had great involvement with the field school and will again this summer. Sean Jones was our lab director last year, and much of our identifications and things that you see tonight were thanks to Sean. So we wouldn't be here without that. And I know several people on tonight, I was looking through, have actually been involved with Barwick. So it's exciting to share this work in particular, to kind of recap what we did last year, but also to pull us into what we're doing this year and really how we're making archaeology accessible. In general, it's a very accessible field to visit. Sometimes it's not always the data, the artifacts aren't always accessible. So we're trying to make this, for Barwick's in particular, much more open. And so kind of starting out, what does accessibility mean? What does it mean to be accessible? So just pulling a generic definition off the web, I think it was probably Wikipedia, and then doing a word cloud from the ADA website guidelines, kind of get an idea of thinking about what it means to be accessible. So of a place that's able to be reached or entered. We can see some terms that come up here a lot with thinking about accessible. I love how people is the first term, that this really is about engaging people. How can we provide opportunities? How can we, and can is a big word there too. How can we make things open and able to be reached? Well, sometimes that relates to the physical world, just being able to get, say, to the Eastern Shore. And in the summer, sometimes it's not very accessible when you get stuck in the summer Bay Bridge traffic. So here's one way maybe we can make things more accessible without actually having to physically go somewhere for whatever reasons are preventing us from getting there. Certainly COVID had a great impact on archaeology, on education, on museums, on pretty much everything in life. And we turned to new ways of making things accessible. And the internet, digital technologies really became more prominent in museums and even in public education and in our school systems. So it, has us thinking more so what ways is archaeology accessible currently? What ways can we make it more accessible? What are the kind of different layers or spheres of accessibility? So I want to talk first on kind of the doing archaeology part, getting information and accessing like a site and more efficiently. And so remote sensing, many of us have already seen or even conducted remote sensing, ground penetrating radar, magnetometry, aerial photography, which now is made even easier with drones. You don't have to rent the airplane and carry a camera out there. So you can do it a little bit more on the fly, but Jason can give us some tips and cautions on that with drone photography. But this helps to make locating sites on the larger scale across the landscape, and then even pinpointing where to dig, much more accessible. So excavation becomes in some ways, I won't overstate it, but easier to get to that point. Photogrammetry and virtual reality enable us to make what we're doing more accessible to people who aren't physically on the site. And also that being both, people who aren't working in the field. So it can be to just people who are interested in, like, say, the history of the Eastern Shore and this 18th century colonial site, or sometimes maybe other archaeologists, professionals who are doing similar work, and to kind of give a comparison as to what's going on across the bay. Some places that we can look, Stephanie mentioned our digital partnerships and museum scholarship. We have created virtual tours. See if it'll take us out to one. I won't go through all of these. And I know Emma is going to talk about these in more depth later on, but creating virtual tours to where you can go in, even though you aren't in Wharton on the Eastern Shore in Kent County, Maryland, but now you are, in a way, right? And you can, travel into seeing what's in the museum. So we can do things of taking people to our sites. Oop. This is done also, there's a virtual excavation tour where this app, you can fly through an excavation. Again, good for people wanting to see it, just to tour Italy in a Roman site, or archaeologists to see kind of how the architecture is laid out, what the plans are, maybe some of the artifacts that are there. So you can fly into it more. There are ways too, thinking about the benefits of this, of like here for professional research and collaboration. Northern Africa for COVID reasons, sometimes political reasons currently. It's not very accessible for people to travel in and to record rock art. And so one way, if you've been doing research on that people are still able to continue that work, or even just to tour it, is through this African Rock Art Image Project from the Smithsonian, where you can go in and see and choose which types of ways you're going to explore the art. So with the public archaeology outreach, I'll leave that for Emma at the end, but also one thing we've been doing with digital partnerships is in getting the artifacts in hand, we're working also to have this be a way to conserve artifacts, but also make them accessible for people to sort of hold and play with. And so this is just from an early pass that we did just this past week, but we've scanned in this bone die and through photogrammetry, taking a sequence of pictures, which Jason will walk us through much better later. But you can actually, from afar, instead of just that static picture, of the die, you can now see the various sides of it. Again, it's not as high quality. This was a first pass on this, and we'll hopefully improve that, but it's pretty cool to see that. So to get us into Barwick, so I'm borrowing from the work, or sharing the work that MHT with Matt McKnight and Zach Singer and folks there did over 2019, 2020. Matt's research here, so you're looking at the historical documents, various deeds, worked through all the various purchases and handoffs over a 200 or 150 year period to finally locate, a certain number of perches from the birch tree or from this gully up here by this certain wharf, was able to calculate and say the likely spot for Barwicks, based off of all these documents, is here in this little white star area. So in 2019 and 2020, they went in and did the remote sensing, did magnetometry and magnetic susceptibility readings in 2019, seeing these orange areas where you can tell, it was with magnetic susceptibility, being able to tell if something was able to be magnetized. The magnetometer read, blips of changes in magnetism under the ground. Ground penetrating radar, rolls over, sends out pulses and senses, and then reads those pulses back. So again, from all of these, it's reading anomalies, things of disruption or objects of metal in magnetometry or burned areas that are buried underneath the landscape. And so they've determined, some unusual spots, things like this rectangle that do not occur in nature, not naturally. So in March of 2021, Washington College, myself, volunteers, some students did some ground truthing to see, okay, are these anomalies, these digitally derived places, are they real, or is it just some machine magic? And it turns out every single thing that had shown as an anomaly, these orange areas, these white areas, were something. In the area here, which we will now refer to as the privy, that's what we presume it is based on shape, the depth coring down into it. We found coins dating to 1737, various other objects. And so from putting in 7 units in this 3-day period, determined that there is a structure or remnants of maybe a cellar here. So a large structure, maybe our tavern, the Ordinary, where people were, buying food or other goods, potentially staying overnight on their way to places. And then this strange ovoid shape over here that we didn't know what it was. But we knew there's something. So over the summer of 2021, as I said, some of y'all came out and worked with us, and hope you'll be coming back again this summer. We put in quite a number more units. We put in, a total of 25 units in the summer, and exposed what we do still believe is the cellar, potentially, of Barwick's Tavern. And who is Barwick's? Barwick, by the time that in 1774, the area becomes the county seat of the newly developed Caroline County, which was carved out of parts of Dorchester and Talbot County. Barwick's is living there and is kind of hired on as a caretaker for what becomes the courthouse. So this is what we think would be his tavern. It's about the appropriate size for what the documents suggest it was, and certainly is yielding a lot of artifacts that, kind of match to that. This area we fully excavated, and it's the only feature that we actually excavated into, and we dug out half of it, and so have some interesting information and some potential dates and some real analysis there that might be able to tell us a little bit more as to what time period are we in. The rest of our features we have only really exposed their surface. We haven't gotten into them, which is what we will be doing during the field session, is digging into this presumed cellar to try to figure out, is it a cellar? Is this related to a tavern? Is it a tobacco warehouse? Probably not likely when you see the artifacts we have been recovering. But just what is it, and does it date to the latter part of the 1700s, which would fit with Barwick and his tavern, or is it earlier and relating to one of those earlier landholders? So a lot of work. Here with our ovoid shape, it turned out to be much more rectangular. Found a lot of fish throughout, but really in the lower area, we have catfish, we have black drum, we have gar, perch. So quite a bit of fish and quite a variety. Some early ceramics, colonial ceramics. We had a nice piece right on the transition to the first part of feature 1, this green glazed earthenware. So probably from a nice lovely cauliflower pot. Had good levels of differentiation within our feature that were really roughly about 10 centimeters each, which bring us to like the best kind of dating we had, clearest dating, was from one pipe stem, the only pipe stem in the whole feature, but from level 3. And it fits in the range of 1720 to 1750, which is earlier than Barwick's Tavern, but potentially this feature, because getting to the green glazed earthenware a little bit later, it might have progressed and been filled in through time. We don't know exactly what this feature was used for. There was a lot of metal, primarily slag down there with the fish scales, brick in the middle. We're still trying to figure out just what this is. Feature 5, our tavern area, had a number more pipes. We really only got into a 1x2, 10 centimeters deep. That's all that we have excavated into feature 5. But from the pipe stems that we have, it's later and it fits the time period thus far. This could change once we really get in there, but of the time period 1750 to 1800. Some clear lines, maybe a little flagstone, maybe marking an entry into the structure, coins from 1740s, and interestingly, in the plow zone area above it, a glass trade bead. So we're really interested in seeing, once we get down further, do we have any more evidence of the American Indian presence that was there, clearly because of the items we're finding, but we don't have those in any context yet. So perhaps we have a tavern, and off the side of it, we have this weird feature 6 that we're not sure its association to the tavern building. Could be a totally different time period, but perhaps it relates similarly to the 1747 bar in Annapolis, where their entry into the basement kitchen is off the side. Pure conjecture right now. So you'd come out, help us figure out what feature 6 is and if it does actually relate to the tavern this summer. Feature 3 is our privy that we think, based on its size, rough shape. Again, we haven't dug into it. We took a split spoon and pushed down in there, and well, Jason did, and got the 3-foot split spoon all the way down to the bottom and still hadn't hit sterile. So we figured this is, nice and deep for a privy. Finding things such as this is a fragment of a thimble. So some other straight pins and various ware. Maybe some of you recently saw the article where the woman out in Seattle dropped her cell phone in one of those outbuilding toilets and decided to go in after it. She tied her dog leash around her to go in after it, and it didn't end well for her, let's just say. So we can now see how things get in, even today, to these types of toilets. So why we might find some really good stuff in there this summer. So with that, I am going to turn over to Jason to take you into much more of an accessible and interesting dive into Barwick.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Can you all hear me? All right, let me share my screen real quick. All right, So one specific aspect of accessible archaeology that we've been exploring at Barwick's Ordinary with our data from last summer and that we're incorporating into our research design this summer and during this year's ASM field session is photogrammetry. So what is photogrammetry? Photogrammetry is essentially the science of making measurements from photographs. It obtains X, Y, and Z coordinates through triangulation from processing overlapping photographs. And the final product can result in highly detailed 3D models. And the cool thing about photogrammetry is that it can be used on both new photos and older or historic photos, provided they have enough overlapping key features to stitch them together. So how exactly can 3D models augment traditional archaeological recording methods? Traditional field recording methods are usually in the form of hand-drawn profiles and plan views, handwritten field notes, and photos. And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the struggle of trying to decipher chicken scratch writing and sometimes blurry photos. We view photogrammetry and 3D modeling as a way to enhance these sometimes subpar field recording methods. To the right here, you can see a 3D model showing layer by layer excavation unit progress. This graphic isn't from our work at Barwick's, and I can't take credit for creating it, but it's just an example of what's to come with our work this summer at Barwick's Ordinary and just how powerful this technology can be for archaeology. This summer, we want to create a sort of a time-lapse model showing our excavation of several features and excavation units. To show an example of our excavations at Barwick's, I created some basic 3D models of several features, both before and after excavation. And they actually weren't made with photos taken with the intent of doing photogrammetry, but we think the results turned out pretty nicely despite this. So let me X out of this and I'll show these models off. All right, so here's the first 3D model. This is feature 1 and feature 4. Feature 1 is represented by the dark rectangular soil stain here. It's about 2 meters by 1.5 meters. And feature 4 is this lighter sand outlining it to the north, east, and partially to the south. And you can zoom into these 3D models, get as detailed as you want, really. Click on the annotations, and it can pull up all sorts of useful information, pre and post excavation photos of these features, field notes, and photos of the artifacts that we recovered from here. All right, here is the next model. So we bisected feature 1 and took out the east half. So this is the west profile of feature 1. And we can see some layers of charcoal and pockets of ash and unarticulated brick and oyster shell. And again, we can really get pretty zoomed in here and get a good amount of detail, even though these photos weren't taken with the intent of creating these 3D models. It turned out pretty well. Let me get back into this PowerPoint. All right, so these were just examples of what photogrammetry can do on a small scale. We've also been exploring the benefits of using this as a means to document entire sites and provide an interactive way for the general public to visit a site. So now I'm just going to dive into the process of how these models were created, how those models and the overall site model, which I'll showcase towards the end, were created. So the equipment that I used included a DJI Mavic 2 Pro drone, flight planner app, and finally some software to process all of those images into the final 3D tour of Barwick's Ordinary. For this, I used a combo of QGIS, Agisoft Metashape, and Blender. So real quick, bear with me, the processing images in Agisoft Metashape, I'll go through this pretty quickly. First, the images are aligned with the overlapping key tie points, and that creates what's called a sparse point cloud. Then it's further processed to create a dense point cloud, which gives more depth information. And if you zoomed into this photo in the top right here, really closely, you'd be able to see that it's still just made up of millions of tiny colored points. So it's not a solid surface model yet. So the next step in the bottom left was processing everything into a shaded mesh, which uses the point cloud that we created first to create a basic model from polygons. So now it's a solid shaded mesh model. After creating the mesh, we can build a textured model, which adds even more detail from the initial aerial photos. And that's in the bottom right. So here's a zoomed in view of the shaded mesh. And here's the textured model. The photos are a little blurry here, but I assure you they're a lot more detailed. Okay, so after the textured model was created in Addresoft Metashape, I imported them into a program called Blender, which is a free and open source 3D computer graphics software toolset. A really powerful tool that made creating a 3D tour of a site possible is an add-on for Blender called Blender GIS, which basically lets you import real-world geographic data into your 3D models. So in this graphic here, you can see an example importing vector contour lines, creating a mesh from those lines, and draping over an image over that mesh. So the final step in my process was finding a platform to easily share the 3D model of our excavations with the public. To do this, I used Sketchfab, which offers free 3D, VR, and AR content sharing. All of these steps culminated into a shareable 3D tour of our site that's easily accessible to those who otherwise wouldn't be able to visit a site in person. So now I'm going to take you on a tour of Barwick's Ordinary. And bear with me here, I'm on hotel Wi-Fi, so. All right, there we go. All right, so here's our site, Barwick's Ordinary. All of the test units you can see outlined in black, and the features that we uncovered are shaded in red and yellow. And you can zoom in as much as you like, and then you can click on these little annotation bubbles here to pull up information about the different features. So feature one was this rectangular soil stain that I showcased a little earlier. And you can see the pre and post excavation photos here, some field notes, and all of the artifacts that we recovered from there. Moving on to feature two. Feature two was a modeled clay daub deposit within feature 5. And it can partially be seen in this photo right here. Feature 3 is what we think is the preview. That's what we're calling it right now. We only uncovered the top of it. We didn't excavate any into it. Feature 4, which I already touched on, was outlining feature 1. And it's about a 5 to 10 centimeter profile. Feature 5, this is what we think is the tavern footprint or cellar of the large structure. Oops. So you can see some of the artifacts that we recovered here. I can click on these pictures and it pulls up a zoomed in view, if you can see that. So we got some diagnostic artifacts, a pipe bowl fragment with a maker's mark, a stoneware sherd with the partial letter G on it, which most likely is GR for Georgius Rex or King George, a George II coin, a bone playing dice, which suggests gambling activity going on here, which is really cool because that was illegal at Barwick's Ordinary. We also found some cool Native American artifacts out of feature 5, or just the top of feature 5. Okay. Feature 6, again, Julie touched on this already. Not sure how it's related to feature 5 yet, but we'll hopefully understand that this summer during the field school and the ASM field session. And then this, we're not really sure what this is, but we recovered a Philip V Spanish real from here, which, although it's pretty worn and difficult to read, the initial research suggests that this particular design, it is from the early 18th century, so like 1700 to 1730s, most likely. And we also, on the edge of feature 5, we came down on a large flat stone, which is possibly an entryway. All right, so I'm gonna turn it over to Emma now.
Thank you, Jason. So as Dr. Markin and Jason have both touched on, there are many applications for this type of technology, not only in academia, but also in public outreach and education, which is a big interest of mine, something I'm very passionate about. And by creating these tours and making them accessible to the public and to researchers, we open doors for crowdsourcing and collaboration, which provides more diverse opinions and insights that you might not have if you're always staring at a site, just you. So outside of academia, though, these tours and technology have the potential to be really valuable to educators. During COVID, many institutions and popular museums started to digitize their collections. It's a process that's been ongoing for the last few years, but COVID really brought it to the light in that we need to digitize these collections so that people can access them everywhere. One big example of this is the Smithsonian Institute and their really popular National Museum of Natural History. So as these technologies become more accessible and more affordable, more museums and archaeological groups on a smaller scale have the opportunity to sustain and create these kind of tours and VR experiences. ThingLink is one that's very popular, and it has different tiers for if you're an academic, if you're a teacher, or if you're someone that just wants to experience tours. So one example of this on a smaller, more local scale would be, at least for Maryland. Can everyone see this? This is the, yeah. This is the Betterton Heritage Museum in Betterton, Maryland. And this was created with the Digital Scholarships and Museum Partnership. And it's, as you can see, this one has over 70 different touch points for people to engage more immersive and more meaningfully with a digitized collection. So there are, audio points, there are points that you can click on that just bring forth the exhibit better so you can see it yourself, and you can move through it completely. So that brings us over to Barwick's. Can we see this? Hold up. If it'll let me. It's not letting me click it. I'm so sorry. But let's try this again. Yes, cool. So if we apply these same principles and ideas to an archaeological site like Barwick's Ordinary, we can provide people with an experience that they might not otherwise get, visiting an active archaeological site and learning about the discipline through more non-traditional means. So by bringing something like Barwick's to classrooms everywhere, especially here in Maryland, we can teach students to better engage with topics like, what did Caroline County look like in the 18th century, or the cultural and environmental differences between the Western and Eastern shores, something that, as someone that was in high school not that long ago, we were always kind of talking about, but we don't have a really immersive type of teaching tool for it. And this can be that for a lot of educators, not just in a public school kind of setting. So not only do the creation of tours help in preserve site integrity and the privacy of any kind of landowners that, private residents, which is very important. You don't want people going on your land, but also aids in building bridges between archaeologists and the public and informing the public on ethical practices within the discipline, providing a sense of transparency and hopefully helping to garner some interest in collaborative archaeology. Overall, these tours, very valuable. And, we hope that we can implement this kind of thing further at Barwick's with the AR, moving the artifacts around, because not only does it help people learn about that aren't involved, but, we can introduce the site to researchers and other archaeologists to say, what do you think about this? So overall, the tours, they're great. And applause to Jason for the amazing Barwick's tour.
So hopefully we have enticed you nicely to come work this summer. The ASM session, the Tyler Bastian annual session, runs from May 20th through May 30th. We have camping on site. Very nicely set up. The landowners have built an outdoor shower with running hot water. So it is hard to pass this up. They have a grill supplied, and it's just a lovely shaded area. So they're fabulous people, fabulous site, but also to help us to build this out and think about, people, you might even have friends who might say, I would love to come out and do a dig, but maybe I have a back problem, or my mobility isn't as good as it used to be, or I have, 3 screaming children at home and I can't bring them out there, and this is a way that we can build archaeology and make it accessible to anybody. If you have, now, I guess there, in some ways, we learned with COVID, it's not always accessible, the internet. There are Wi-Fi challenges out there, but in general, if you can get to a computer or your cell phone, you could access archaeology. And as Emma noted too, crowdsourcing and ways, this is great for thinking also of preserving our sites, even if not, in addition to the physical spaces and also the physical objects. Sometimes they come to natural disasters, or in the case of the National Museum of Brazil in 2018, a fire engulfed and destroyed the museum and the majority of the objects that were housed there. If we think proactively about digitizing our collections, we have a way to not just share those out to the world, but preserve them for posterity. So it's not a replacement of being out in the field, but it's an enhancement, and something that you can then be in the field, or people can, even when the weather's bad. They can sort of handle objects, even if they're not really allowed to, normally. So this is what we will continue to keep building this summer. So digging in literally deeper to figure out what these structures are, and then continuing to share that out with everyone. And so even after you leave from the session, after the 30th rolls on, you can keep track of what's going on later and see what's developed as we keep putting this out there. So I think we're ready for questions, I suppose.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat, but I would like to encourage all of our participants again that if you have any questions or comments or thoughts, to either raise your hand or put them in the chat. But otherwise, Julie, I guess I'll just kind of turn it back over to you to just have a bit of a discussion, some of the topics we were talking about earlier.
Hi, I have a question. Firstly, Julie, Jason, Emma, thank you so much for just the incredible work that you're doing to preserve these non-renewable resources and truly make these sites accessible to all. But that being said, I do have a question about, maybe the ways in which this accessibility can make our sites vulnerable. If we are digitizing artifact concentrations and features down to the layer, how can we, I guess, counter that desire for inclusivity, for accessibility, with the real threat of looting and vandalism?
So one way of addressing that is the kind of answering the first question: where does this live? Does this live on a publicly accessible website? Certainly we would like for the education part for it to, but then that way, does that mean we have like 2 different versions, which is more where I would go into, much like you can access Medusa and get in and get the actual site information if you're a professional and have been registered through there, but you can't access all that information if you're the public. So I think that's probably the easier kind of, without really getting into the technical parts of really figuring this out, which I think still needs to be done. would be one solution. And so that in the public one, like there with the tour Jason has created and all, you don't know where that is in space, you know, and so you can even see all the levels, but if you don't know where that is, you can't go there and, you know, maybe loot or try to find those coins yourself. So I think probably the way that would move forward is the professional tour would be on a secure website with
Great, thank you.
registered access.
I'd also like to add that it's not a georeferenced 3D model, and it's not downloadable.
We have a question from Aaron as well.
That's for you, Jason.
How much time does it take to create something like the 3D site model that you shared? So I think it took me 3 to 4 weeks just because I was learning all the different programs. Never used Blender before. That was by far the most confusing one for 3D modeling. But yeah, I could probably do it within a week now.
Jason, and this could be for you or for any of you. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the costs that are involved with this? First, with the equipment that is needed to, you know, to take the data, then with the software, and then, I mean, hosting. I mean, you know, how much are we talking about? Is this possible for most archaeologists or
Yeah, so
individuals?
that's a good question. So my drone that I have a DJI Mavic 2 Pro, and I got it used for about $1,000. But you can get a lot more budget-friendly ones that can still do the same stuff for, I mean, maybe like $500. As for like software, for Agisoft Metashape, which is the photogrammetry software that I just used the demo. So it's a 30-day free trial. They do have like paid full versions, but I just used the demo. The paid version for the standard is like, I think it's like $200, and then professionals like $2,000. So yeah.
It's true that at kind of every level of this, there's costs. So many of us know the remote sensing equipment, depending on which type you buy and if you're buying it or renting it, which thankfully there are some renting options, those are not inexpensive. They can run in the thousands of dollars. So as a small scale operation, it may not be as cost effective. For hosting like the 3D tours, the ThingLink, that we're able to use it at Washington College more easily and with these small volunteer museums because we're an educational institution, and so we have a discounted rate. Otherwise, and that's one thing we have thought about when we work with these small museums, is the cost like for them later. So in terms of digitizing the objects, that's a camera, the kind of a turntable, and then the computer processing. But beyond that, we have everything live in a secure, maybe not as secure as we would prefer, but so that they have access to it when we hand it off in a Google Drive set of folders. So that's free. With all of these things and some of the digitizing software we use that are just apps we download, you do have to be careful because sometimes you really got to read all the fine print, because we have chosen not to use some apps to scan documents because it notes in there that, whatever you scan, whatever you use with this app, we have access to. And we're like, well, that's not okay for our, field notes and maps and all of that information. And so ThingLink can run for hosting it, for having it, and then annually hosting it in the hundreds of dollars. So it's true, accessible to the public once it's out there, but maybe not as accessible to be able to create these things.
Kind of just jumping off of that, it is still a big expense, the equipment that Jason's using, and then the like membership fees for certain hosting sites. But all in all, it's becoming a lot more accessible and affordable, that not just institutions like the Smithsonian can afford it anymore, but smaller partner museums can afford the costs for it, especially when they are partnered with larger institutions. But I think overall it's becoming something that more museums in general can participate in and provide tours out to their communities.
The only other kind of, okay, there are probably many, but another kind of significant thing to think about as we move forward with these types of technologies is their lifespan. As technologies, develop and the new thing comes on, then ThingLink will roll out. I mean, some of the technologies I used a few years ago are no longer, those apps don't exist anymore. So there is that upkeep. I don't think that should, though, prevent us from trying to engage with new technologies. There are ways to then migrate things over. But yes, as with everything archaeological, you have your trade-offs, your cost, your time, how your storage space, all of these things. But yes, we're just talking with someone yesterday about, how many people, QR codes. A few short years ago, I never used a QR code, what it was or how to create one. Now they're everywhere. You order your dinner, even sitting in a restaurant, nobody gives you a menu anymore. It's like, go get the QR code. And we were talking about, putting these on, markers at historic sites here in Kent County, but we don't want to only put up markers that have QR codes. We're trying to think ahead because we know in a few more years, the marker will stand for 100 years. The QR code may only last for 10 more, so it is to think about what is the lifespan of the technologies we're using, and then what, and thinking about costs and all there too.
This is Lou Tolman. I just had a comment. Can you hear me? Great. So an outfit in England that I'm hooked up with from time to time in archaeology is called digventures.com. And about once a year, they offer a photogrammetry introductory course online for about $45 or $50. I haven't taken it yet, but I did take another course with them and it was quite good. So that's a possibility. Again, it's digventures.com, all one word in Dig Ventures. Thank you.
Excellent. That's affordable. That's good to know. I put it in the chat for everybody. Thank you.
So I suppose I have a question, and for all of you, and really, for anybody even in the audience. I mean, what is the potential of this type of accessible archaeology? In an ideal world, where would you want to see this type of technology go? Or, what, in the next 10 years, 20 years?
Well, oh, somebody else want to go? Emma, were you about to say something? Oh, no, you go ahead. I've talked a lot.
I mean, I know for me, because education is something that I'm really interested in, I think I'd like to see it implemented more in classrooms, especially kind of K through 12, because I think it can be a very valuable learning tool to better understanding not only the history of where you're living, but then also like worldwide. And that's not always something that you can get just reading a textbook or watching a video in a classroom.
I just had a comment as well. I think much like virtual talks and conferencing that we've seen in the last few years, I think eventually down the road, 10 years time, it would be wonderful if all sites could be digitized in some way so that they can be accessed by folks who, don't have $4,000 to go do a field school in Bulgaria like I did, or possibly have health issues that keep them from pursuing a dig in person. But really accessibility just brings everyone in and able to share more ideas and perspectives than we would have alone. So, much like we're all sitting here and it's second nature to get on a Zoom call, I think down the road it'll be great to just pop open the 3D model and chat about this layer and that.
And I just imagine, when looking, I do a lot of regional archaeology, or at least I did in the Southeast. And so being able to go and pull the site forms and all the information out of an access database that I need and what kind of artifacts, and then go look at a report and read what artifacts there were and kind of see the drawings was great. And then once I moved here to Maryland and was still doing work on Georgia sites, I was able to access their site file, the state site file, and pull all reports and download everything because they digitized it all, which was fantastic. But I imagine, like, how great would it be if attached with every site form, or at least ones that had reports, you'd have the report and this 3D, because sometimes you can read and say, okay, level 1, and you see the map, the plan view and how things were arranged, and then what's in level 2 and how, but just to actually feel like you walk in and like, oh, it makes way more sense now because I see it as it was coming down and excavated, and to understand the relationships between things, or why something got messed up, not recorded properly. Oh, I see. You couldn't tell that very well in that first pic, when you first came down on it. So I think it would help, for all research to kind of better understand what was excavated, what existed before, and then also some of those things that go on while we're digging, to understand how we got to our reports too. And to not, like, if I can't make it over to the library in MHT, that I could get on it from, Chestertown and still be doing all that research without having to hit the bridge. So one way for professionals, and then as Emma's saying, for education, over the recent years, schools, not just because of COVID, but our K through 12 don't do as many field trips. I remember going to all kinds of field trips as a kid, and that's how I got into archaeology, going to Moundville, and they don't necessarily get to go. Buses, there aren't enough drivers, there's no money for it. But through this, students can engage. They can go somewhere, like you were saying, over to Bulgaria, even if it's from their classroom. And anybody, every kid in the public school gets that opportunity, not just some.
I had a question. I missed the first few minutes, but maybe you covered this. But is there a theory yet on why this ideal location and wonderful site, you could drink and sue people at the same time, why this went away and things moved to Denton? Thank you.
Yes, there is. Right now I'm drawing a blank as to exactly why they moved to Denton, now that you asked me. Why was it they moved? I think it was just deemed like a better location. The warehouse area that the court had been built in and the jail was in some disrepair. And so that moved over to Edenton, and then it moved like back, and then it eventually settled in Denton. But I think between just the facilities were not up to snuff enough anymore, and just the way that transportation maybe was shifting in the area, it just moved over to Denton. But I'll have to get back to you on that, because it is in actually Matt and Zach's report that they have out on Barwick's, and I just need to reference that at the moment you called me.
What I found interesting was one thing that someone said was that, and maybe I missed why this was, gambling wasn't allowed. Wasn't that you, Jason, that said that?
Yeah, Julie, do you remember where we found that information from?
Yeah, and so Matt, again, he did tons of historical research going out to, prior to the 2019 and 2020 remote sensing. He and Zach presented on it at MAC last year. And so he had found in like I don't know if it was the charter for Barwick's Ordinary, but some documents from Barwick's that James Barwick said there will be no gambling or tippling on the premises. Well, we have stemware from the premises, so, and nice jugs that would have carried some nice beverages in them. So clearly nobody was following his rules. As would be in a tavern, right? No, yeah.
I can't imagine being in a tavern with tippling or what is it called?
No.
I think I remember reading that like tippling was continually drinking. It's like lounging around drinking all the time.
Well, yeah, right. These are 18th century standards here where, you sort of have a slight buzz from sun up to sundown. So it's all relative, I suppose. Drinking a lot of beer. Putting archaeologists to shame. To this point, Keith had a question in the chat about what happened after 1791. Did you find 19th century artifacts, or did the site just return to agricultural use after that?
There are some ceramics, some plate wares like the feather edge wares from the 19th century. It's much more limited. And again, we aren't down in features, but yeah, it did return to some agricultural use, but it hasn't actually been in kind of production for, I don't know, 70 years or more. So it's kind of just been there as the property in this nice little field up there for quite some time. But there is at least a light occupation or a light usage in the 19th century.
We also haven't processed all the artifacts yet, unfortunately, due to COVID, but hopefully that'll give us some insight into that.
Which also goes to another question that I saw. What about a rain day? We will have 2 lab facilities working when we're in the session, and one is all indoors. It's in Greensboro, which is about a 6-mile drive from the site. So we'll have one in the field, but one that is set up and air conditioned, and has running water and toilets and all this good stuff. So if we're on a rain day, we'll all go in there. And then otherwise, if there are, any individuals who just prefer I love the lab, that's all I want to do, I want to, catalog artifacts, we got a spot for you. We will love to get you working. But as Jason says, we're still catching up, still trying to process everything from last year. So we'll have a better answer, hopefully in the next few months.
So this is a question from Jessica, and I'm actually going to change it a little bit to ask Jason and Emma the question. For both of you, do you plan to build on your work digitizing sites and as you move forward in both of your careers? And the second part of her question is, what advice do you give to other students and young professionals who are interested in pursuing more accessible archaeology? Because I think, for a lot of young professionals, you get out of college and you're like, well, I'll just go and, work in CRM or whatever, but this work is kind of next level. So what's what would you tell people just coming out of school?
Yeah, I definitely plan to continue digitizing sites and doing more public focused archaeology. I'd say my advice would be just to be involved in your small regional archaeology organizations. Here in Maryland, we have CfMA, ASM. I think just being involved in those and going to all of their events is helpful.
I agree, and I would say it's something that I'm definitely interested in pursuing. I would say to not just focus on, the technological aspect of it, but I feel like it's still important to get the lab time and the field time, because you're going to have those perspectives to bring into your accessible, tour or whatever you're doing with it, and also to talk to people about the accessibility. When you stare at something for so long, you start to only get one perspective, or you start to miss things. And I think talking to people is really important, especially not just about, the accessibility of technology and money, but also for like disabilities and with the guidelines for how a site should be accessible, like a website.
And I suppose to that point, I mean, Julie, I'll ask you, I mean, how do you hope to continue inspiring students to do this kind of work?
By continuing to offer the opportunities is the main key, and being engaged myself. So I am one of the 3 members of the Digital Scholarships and Museum Partnership collective, I guess. It's myself, library academic technology, technologist Raven Bishop, and an education professor, Sarah Clark DeReza. And so this is for this public education, making collections and history accessible. I'll continue that with the remaining museums in Kent County, of which there are 9 more for us to work with. And then we might reach out to Queen Anne's and Cecil, so all around us. So plan to continue learning myself and building these partnerships and involving students. We have students start from a pre-orientation session when they're freshmen coming in, start doing this work and digitizing. They come through my museum studies and archaeology methods class and get involved in that, and then move on with the education class on developing curriculum and such too. So they see this whole arc of the process. And then also with working more technologies into the various archaeological projects I'm in, incorporating more GIS, trying to make those partnerships with our GIS lab here, learning from Jason on thinking about how to, this has opened up a lot of thinking to me. I'm very kind of old school, and I hadn't thought about how amazing this can be. And from beforehand, not just, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do this afterwards? And Jason did a phenomenal job of doing this from photos. As he noted, we didn't take the photos with like, how would this be great to then stitch these together into this tour. He stitched together photos we took just from the traditional, like, get your east view and your west view, and but thinking about this proactively and how we can really streamline the process, how we can make it the most useful and meaningful, and thinking about it in ways for collaborating with other professionals, but then really thinking about reaching out to schools. And through, give a plug, anybody want to be part of the education committee, I put my email in the chat earlier. These are things we can kind of explore through the committee if you want to contribute and work on that. But I think mostly I'll keep trying to incorporate new technology, stay on the curve of that in classes and in excavations, and really just help train the next generation into this kind of broader perspective of thinking.
Well, for sure. And I think also, I mean, just kind of giving them room to, for their ideas to come to fruition, I mean, makes the whole experience that much more fruitful and meaningful in the end, right?
Absolutely. And as Emma's saying, those different perspectives and often change and innovation, comes from the youth. And I'm not on the youth end anymore. So yeah, listening and learning myself.
No, I love how multidisciplinary, all of this work is, both like within the university itself and then, outside in the community. We have a couple more questions in the chat. Caitlin asks, and I probably can't be the one to answer this, but how does one get a job in archaeology that helps them to travel globally? Is that jobs within the Smithsonian, government, CRM? All of my work has been in this country, so I'm not one to answer this.
I'm not sure I can really answer this too well either, but I know on archaeologyfieldwork.com, I've seen some postings for like Guam, just not continental US.
Yeah, most of my work has been in the US as well. Actually, all my work. That's a good question. The government, the Smithsonian.
I would think honestly, a lot of it starts with academia, right? I mean, like starting like in academia, starting to like sort of work down a road where you can be in like an international field school. And then, or, sadly, maybe even having the money to pay to, dig overseas and then start to build that network. Because as we all know, we talked about this in a webinar last year that Jessica did a fabulous job moderating about how do I get a job in archaeology these days. Like, it's so much about your network, really, when it comes to getting work in archaeology. So, be that domestically or internationally.
Yeah, I could answer that a little bit because I'm interested in going in field schools and short and long experiences overseas, and most of them are run by academics who are assistant professors, associate professors, that sort of thing, but who specialize in someplace exotic and go there every year. Like there was one field school that went several years in Petra, one of the most exotic locations on Earth. That Dig Ventures outfit that I mentioned, they have 11 full-time archaeologists on staff. They're crowd-funded, and they two of the staff are Americans. Let's see, down here at the university, I'm temporarily in Alabama, and here the archaeologist on staff has got a dig that goes regularly in Oman, in a very exotic location. So I'd say that's one way to do it.
Yeah, I was recently at the Society for American Archaeology conference, and I will say most of the international sessions I sat in were, sponsored by academic institutions. A professor sort of like leading a dig in a certain area of Belize or Mexico, or wherever it might have been.
Otherwise, maybe if you get into forensic archaeology, you might be able to travel with, like, through the UN, doing various forensic work there. I've known a couple of people who did that, but generally on digs, I agree. I second what everybody has said, is through academic institutions, someone who has a program running in general already.
But I mean, honestly, to bring it back to the topic of what we're talking about here tonight, you can't, the cool thing about the work that you all are doing and some of the work you've highlighted is that you can experience, an archaeological dig across the world. You can't, maybe you won't get dirt under your nails, but you'll certainly have a much better understanding of a site. And no, Julie, just to sort of go on off a point that you made earlier, like, in my mind, it would be so amazing to just be able to get on, maybe it is proprietary and maybe it's for archaeology, for professional archaeologists only, but like to be able to go and, look at a site that, was excavated decades ago, and then to see, to be able to see that, really what I'll have all the information in just one spot, with the units themselves and the artifacts and, all of it just right there at your fingertips, I think would be amazing. Stephen Israel, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking about that site that you and I talked about years ago. What was the name of that site? It's scratching my head. Wait, you're muted, Stephen. It was right next to Mayo Beach Park in Anne Arundel County.
Saunders Point.
Saunders Point, that's right.
Historic Saunders Point, and in Arundel County. Yes,
yeah. Stephen was involved with this excavation back in the 60s, I think.
yes.
Somebody was putting in a swimming pool and hit this amazing colonial cellar. And, the nascent ASM went out and dug it and, did the best job that they could at the time. But Stephen and I, talked years ago, just trying to pick his brain to like remember what happened on a site. So, hopefully with technology like this, that's going to not make that wholly necessary. Partially, we also need to pick the brains of archaeologists for sure for some of that extra detail.
Well, that's, I think, Valerie, I think is who said it in the chat. It might have been somebody else. I apologize if I got it wrong. But, coastal sites that are eroding, you know, that may not be here again if we could document them this way, and then can visit places that are no longer there. I think about the same thing with all the TVA and all the Corps of Engineers reservoir building in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. Can't go back to those now. What if,
That's right.
you know, they're being recorded that way? How cool.
Well, does anyone have any final comments? This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. You know, to our speakers, I'll turn it back over to you for any final comments or thoughts.
Yes, and actually, let me real quick, I'm going to snag these, well, no, I don't have the snag. I'll have to direct you to Zach Singer and the MHT page to sign up for the ASM dig for anyone who has not signed up. But the dates again, May 20th through 30th. I did put my email in the chat, so if you even just want to email me, I can get you connected in for the dig. But we are very excited. There's so much more to learn. We will be exposing large areas here, trying to figure out exactly the shape of the privy, figure out all the confines of the cellar, and then actually really get into this. So it's going to be a very rich excavation, very fun, and there is going to be some music, some bluegrass music at the end of the dig. So some good fun time. So I'm trying to give all the teasers I can right now to get everybody into the field session. If you are not interested in camping and are looking for other options for housing, do shoot me an email. I can point you to some of the better, maybe shorter locations, or, you know, depending on what you're interested in, somewhere over here where to stay that's convenient. But yeah, and if you have any other questions any other time, just shoot me an email. And thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you to Jason and Emma for your evening, for your labor putting this together to get ready for this and for developing these really cool tours and accessible interactive opportunities.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Julie, could you just for a moment speak to the accessibility of beginner level at the site? We had a question from Hannah asking.
The answer is it's for anybody and everybody. And in fact, different from many sessions, I can't speak to all because I haven't been to all the ASM sessions, but the ASM session will be running concurrently with the Washington College Archaeological Field School. So there will be Washington College students there who have never dug before, for whom this will be their first foray into the world of archaeology. And so they will be beginners. They start 2 days before you do, the session does. So we will walk us all through it. It's for those of you who are well experienced, watch out. I will put you in charge of something, be prepared. For anyone who is not as experienced, we'll partner you up with someone. But it is, at the same time, I am very much a teacher, and so I will walk us all through things. And so you might even have to at some point tell me, yeah, I got it. And so I'll move along. But yeah, it's very accessible. My kids come out. So even if you have children, I am pro kids coming out if they're of an age where they can be, you know, kind of trusted, not even fully trusted, but as long as you're there, then it's accessible for children too. You know, yeah.
Julie,
Yes.
could you also say something about the property owners and how you keep, you know, enticing them to let students come back every year?
Well, they're just fabulous is all I can say. Joe and Cheryl Smith are amazing, but they have been very happy thus far with us working there, with what we're finding. Joe comes out and digs with us. He fortunately, we have had a very good relationship, such that at the end of the day, often people would go jump in off their dock. Let's jump off the dock into the Choptank River. We did have an unfortunate situation last year. So one afternoon, the neighbors who no longer live there, so we won't have to worry about this happening this year, were having a memorial service, and we're going to be spreading the ashes of their deceased relative. And they were supposed to have finished this earlier in the day, like 1 o'clock, and we wrap at 3 or 3:30. And apparently somebody was stuck on the bridge, didn't get there. And so they were out on the boat with, I just call him Uncle Tim. I can't remember what the individual's name was. Their ashes while the field school students were swimming, and decided to cast Uncle Tim along right around the field school students. And everyone's saying, wait, let us get out. We'll get out. And they said, well, Uncle Tim would love this, and we're like, that's not the point. But they've moved. Joe and Cheryl, of course, are like, oh my gosh. But they are so good. They want us there. They want to know what's going on. They are really interested in what happened on their site, through time, and sharing it with people. They're such big-hearted individuals, and we've just developed a good rapport. And fortunately, yeah, as Dawn says, they want us to keep coming back. They seem to be fine for us to keep plugging away at Barwick's and until, I guess, years down the road if we all get tired of it. But they're in no hurry. They're very supportive of everything that we're doing, the digging, the engaging people from Caroline County, from across the bridge, engaging the ASM, just really sharing their site, their home even. They've offered, come shower in the house. I mean, they're just really wonderful, wonderful people. And the Caroline County Historical Society, similarly, so they provide the building that our lab is in. We don't pay anything for it. They run all the utilities for it. They have a refrigerator full of water. Anything we've asked for, they provide. Oh, Joe, the landowner, sharpens our shovels every weekend so that when we come back on Monday, we have sharp tools. I mean, we're spoiled rotten over there. So come get spoiled, is all I can say. And bring a swimsuit, because you can jump in. No neighbors.
Well, that's a crazy story.
I felt terrible.
Well, I'm sure your field school students will never forget that.
Never forget Barwick's. Barwick's will be permanently a part of them.
Well, on that note, I suppose I will call this webinar to a close. From a personal note, I just want to say, Julie, Jason, and Emma, thank you so much for the work that you have done. And, this is super cool. Thank you for sharing it. Keep doing what you're doing. And we look forward to seeing you next month at Barwick's. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. See you all in a few weeks.